Press. Thanks for joining me for this third and penultimate part of my real revolutionary story. I am sharing this story now because our civilization has long been misled by many false perceptions about life and God, worth and value. Our societies are now governed by deceptions and lies, framed to sow doubt and fear and nurture greed. The genocide in Gaza has proven that the rule of international morality is still but a fleeting illusion we are not even really pursuing. So, I wrote this series to share what I believe is the truth about our existence and what we can do to align our patterns of life with it. In this episode, I said I will explain the root of the problems that grew to plague our civilization. Ultimately, though, it does not matter what we believe about God, science, civilization, or the workings of the universe. What is important is understanding that global changes in the climate, the kind of changes that have occurred several times before and alter the conditions of life on a global scale, have always required an evolutionary response from the species alive at the time. Species that fail to adapt to the new conditions tend not to survive. Darwin worked a lot of that out over 165 years ago. What we don't know is what changes are going to occur in our climate, for how long they will continue to increase in number and severity, or to what degree of change the global climate will have shifted by the time all the changes have played out. What we actually really need to know is how we are going to adapt to those changes. Unfortunately, from what we have seen so far, it looks like we're not really going to adapt very well at all. Hypothetically, if we had 50 years to prepare for the Second World War, would we spend that time telling people the Nazis are not a threat, whilst watching their arsenal increasing? Or that the worst can be avoided by making devices to catch bombs? Would we only begin trying to come up with plans to stop the Nazis when Poland was invaded, yet still invite them into our meetings to help us write those plans? Climate change, which was confirmed 50 years ago, is now happening. Yet we are still relying on corrupted and ineffective governments and institutions to try to work out how to address the symptoms of the problem, when it is the consequences of the problem we need to be preparing for. Global environmental changes require an evolutionary response, an adaptation to the way we function as a species on this planet. We are not, and have not really been trying to prevent climate change getting worse. We are not providing anywhere near enough assistance to communities already affected by changes in the environment, and often our social systems are not able to react adequately to events when they do occur, even in the most developed nations. If we fail to adapt to these changes, we run the risk of becoming extinct. Maybe, with all our modern gender fluidity, we will just become Homo sapiens sapiens. But, joking aside, we do have to treat climate change like a war for survival. and one in which our guns, bombs and missiles are of no use whatsoever. In order to survive as a species, even if not the same one we are now, we need to reduce emissions of CO2 into the atmosphere as much as possible. With any more than 3 to 4 degrees of warming, most basic actions, like growing food and breathing, will become incredibly difficult. If we do not reduce our CO2 emissions immediately, their 30-year warming cycle will result in the loss of billions of lives. This is not new though. None of this is new. Our planet, like all planets with life, changes. Climate change is the future we were warned about. Catastrophic floods and fires, deprivation, famine, diseases, pandemics, wars fought over land and resources, millions and millions of displaced people, more floods and fires. So why, besides our misunderstandings about God, are we such a destructive species? Why can we not control ourselves in balance with our planet? Why do we instead rush to gain as much as we can for ourselves of whatever it is we desire or need or crave or love? How is it that we have grown up to not understand the nature of the world we live in or our connection to it, when it is what all existence comes from and points to? What is it that has really misled our species to ignore what even God taught us and to seek short-term gratification by consuming stuff that appeals to our senses, rather than to seek to understand the basis of the real sense of connection that we as individuals share in our species and with all the rest of our existence? One word: possession. Not money, and not possession by evil spirits either, despite the sadistic acts of a broad range of people over the millennia. Possession as in the possession of property, possession of land, possession of resources, and possession of wealth. Our civilization was founded on the principle we can own the land that we inhabit, and thereby the resources we get from it are ours to do with as we please. That was only about 15,000 years ago. By then, we had already worked out that seeds come from plants, which come from seeds, which come from plants, as well as what we needed to do to collect those seeds and make them grow successfully enough to reap a harvest from them. 15,000 years ago, before we had even built our first houses, we had learnt about the circle of life and how to nurture it. We were awake and already forming ideas about how that circle got started, where the first seed of life came from, and how it grew into everything around us. Sorrowfully, in the 9,000 years between the start of our agricultural civilization and the first intervention by God, we had taken the idea of possession or ownership and begun to use it for our own benefit. We first traded resources within our communities, and then between communities, which saw the creation of trade routes. Some people decided they owned the land that traders journeyed over and began demanding payments for transit. Initially, this kind of daylight robbery, or tax, would have been some of the resources being traded. However, as trade increased and the amount of plunder being taken as payment for transport over claimed land also increased, there grew a need to guarantee the value of goods being traded to protect against any potential theft or land tax. The result was devising a means to measure the cost of traded goods with a kind of universal currency, from which a fraction could then be split to balance the overall value of a trade if required. In the first instance, that currency was grain. A goat was worth so many heads of corn. A woven cloth was worth so many handfuls, with the bartering parties agreeing the total value of goods being traded prior to transit. As society spread, merchants and landowners began to trade in new measures of value that symbolized their status and high levels of income or material gain. In the city of Babylon, at the time of God's first visit, precious metals like silver and gold were the measures of value in society, with the first coins or money being minted about 2,500 years ago, just before the time of Christ's birth. Over time, the people with control of the land and trade in resources grew to possess a lot of these riches and used the assets they gained to influence society to revere people with lots of gold and silver and nice shiny things that made them look special. Civilized society still maintains a pursuit for symbols of status. Yet, the vast majority of people are prevented from achieving the same levels of affluence landowners and merchants have achieved by making gains in their made-up protection costs, like tax, rent, insurance, and money itself. Our borders, social structures and patterns of life have all been shaped by our civilized modern human perceptions of ownership and the measure of value of the resources in our possession. For just over 2,000 years, but especially since the launch of global sea trade in the 1500s and 1600s, the measure of value of all our resources, including our own value as people in society, has been money. The reality is, we cannot own the land. We do not own the resources of the earth. All these things, everything, it is all just light caught in moments of time. We can use resources whilst they are in our possession, and we should, in a lot of cases, pay for the privilege of having use of them. But that does not mean they belong to us forevermore. Besides, it has become perfectly clear that the people with control over the land and trade in resources, including the ridiculous means of trading money itself, have very little intention of sharing the wealth they create with the rest of us. In fact, some of them persuade our elected representatives to take steps to ensure that the measured wealth of the world remains primarily in their hands. In the next and final episode, I will explain how we can remove it from their hands. Still, society does need a measure of trade, a measure of value for trade. one that represents a common value of all resources able to be traded, which enables those resources to be shared equitably within society in a system wherein we also have value. Money does not really do that. We can use interest rates and inflation and many other indicators to try to maintain balanced levels of value of the resources in our economic system. But those resources have never been shared fairly within the system, and money itself has no correlation to the natural value of any resource or our own value as people. The point is, in my opinion, an economic system with time as the value of measure, wherein all resources are valued by the total time it takes for them to form over the quantity able to be worked and traded in that or any specified length of time, is the only way to balance the complexity of our modern human society with the complexity of life on Earth. Furthermore, we give time to society through our employment, so we could get time back as currency. If we all commit an equal amount of time to society for an equal amount of currency in return, with hours and minutes being the same the world over, a time-based economy could give us universal wages with a universal currency. Or, as I prefer to see it, the perception of having an equal value as an individual within our global society. Or freedom. That is not the point though. The point of this story is that in our universe, where light is both matter and energy, time is the current of flow. Time is the true measure of value in our universe, and should be the measure of value in our economy. I am certain, if we had not misunderstood the relativity of the time God took to tell Abraham their story about life, and we knew why Christ travelled to England in his absence from the Bible, we may well have settled on a system of values measured by time already. But we didn't. We thought we knew better. We have since worked out that we don't know a lot better. We do know that our environment is changing, and that we must adapt to those changes if we are going to survive. Life is that simple. It is only the systems and structures of civilization that have made life difficult for the vast majority of people. However, now I have started to explain why and how we need to replace them. In the final episode, I can and will share how to bring our unrepentant, unnatural, unequal, and frankly uneconomic systems to their knees. For now, thanks for listening to my real revolutionary story. I am Chris, and I hope you do join me again one last time.